Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to start with some of the questions and comments that people sent me after last week's class. And I culled from those three that I think I'm going to discuss with the entire class today. One had to do with the review of the various economic systems that have been prevalent in the world from the beginning to the present time. And I was asked why I had overlooked the institution of slavery. It's quite true that I did. I did not go into the system of the production system, which was based on slavery, mainly because I didn't spend a lot of time on the particular labor aspect of the factors of production. But there's no reason why I shouldn't mention it now. And incidentally, before doing that, let me just reiterate what I said in the memorandum that I had Mr. Johnsrud send you, that if you're having trouble hearing, please let me know. Apparently some people did have problems hearing from time to time. The institution of slavery is multi-secular, it's multi-millennial. It has existed from practically the beginning of human society, certainly with the advent of the agricultural revolution, the so-called hydraulic empires, right up to the 19th century. It's a system that has not entirely disappeared from the world today, but it is uncommon. In any case, as a basis for an economy, slavery is not a particularly productive system. For one thing, the institution of slavery is a cradle-to-grave socialist system. The slave owner, of course, had to provide all of his slaves with a place to live, with food, with clothing, with everything, including the tools with which they worked. He did not, of course, have to pay them. On the other hand, the manufacturers, talking about the United States now, where the institution of slavery by the mid-19th century was limited to southern states and had been abolished in most of the northern states. The manufacturers in the north, all they had to do was pay their workers their hourly or weekly or monthly wages, and that ended their responsibility. Whatever they did with it was their business. If the worker decided to drink most of it in alcoholic beverages, that was his business. The owner of the manufacturing business had no responsibility beyond paying the wage. Nevertheless, the incentives for in free labor are much stronger than in slave labor, simply because of the human desire to make your own decisions, to frankly be free. Therefore, and that's why the slave owners had to employ and had to pay wages to slave drivers. These were the people who rode around or walked around the fields making sure the slaves were working hard. At any rate, the institution of slavery had become so uneconomical by the 19th century that the institution was being abolished all over the place. In the 1830s, it was abolished in the British colonies, for example, and basically existed only in certain countries such as the United States, in certain parts of the United States, and in Brazil, as well as a few others. In any case, even in the United States, almost all of the states would have abolished slavery had it not been for the invention of the cotton gin, as I mentioned the last week. So, as a result, mostly of the difference in the incentive structure The North was much more productive than the South, and that was one of the main reasons that the North ended up winning eventually, after 4 years of horrendous warfare, winning the Civil War. Slavery is not a highly productive way of running an economy, even though, as I say, it has thousands of years of tradition and was defended by people like Aristotle, for example, who considered it a natural institution. All right, the second thing that I decided to pick from the various questions and comments that came in after last week's class, and of course I answered all of them to the people involved, but I only picked these three to discuss in class today. The second one had to do with my discussion of the industrial, the various economic revolutions that have taken place through in the history of economics, of how people make and exchange and sell and buy and do things in an economic way. And that had to do with the corporation. And we're going to discuss that because we hadn't completed the discussion of the theory of the firm at the end of the last period. The other aspect, which was of great importance to a student, and which I think certainly justifies a certain amount of time being spent on it, was when I mentioned that the world is going through another economic revolution. And this has to do primarily with manufacturing, not only in terms of the increased usage and sophistication of robots, which is taking place, but also what is referred to as 3D, namely three-dimensional manufacturing. And that is the replication of objects in the same way that two-dimensional copying takes place. When you use your printer as a copy machine and you make a copy of a document, that's two-dimensional copying. Three-dimensional copying can actually make objects, such as hammers, and any number of different things, and it's becoming more sophisticated all the time. So that you can have these machines operating and have only 2 or 3 or 4 human beings who are supervising things mostly by staring at computer screens. And this has to do also with a very important social aspect of the modern economy, which I want to spend some time on. Of the factors of production that we discussed last week, land, labor, capital, and management, capital is becoming more and more significant. Labor is becoming less and less significant. In other words, wealth is now going primarily to those who own productive assets, not their physical labor. So you have 2 elite classes from the economic standpoint at the present time: the owners of productive capital and those who are imagining and putting into practice new techniques for communications, for transportation, for manufacturing, and so on, which then result in firms such as Microsoft, such as Apple, such as thousands of others, which then accrue to the benefit of those who own them. Why is this significant? It's extremely significant for 2 reasons. First of all, there is a concentration of wealth similar to the concentration of wealth that took place after the first industrial revolution at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th centuries. More and more people have less and less of the wealth of society fewer and fewer people have more and more of the wealth of society. This is obviously a situation that has social, psychological, and political implications beyond the economic implications. There are various schemes, plans, projects for what is sometimes referred to as expanded capital ownership. And I'm not talking about people's capitalism or something of that sort, where anybody can buy a few shares of this company or a few shares of that company and so on. This is not significant. What is significant is with reference to, is someone trying to tell me that they're not hearing well? I heard a signal. Is everything normal? I notice that I'm not moving on the screen. Okay, is this better now? All right.
Smiley face from everybody, please.
Is it all right now? Can you hear me and can you see me? Hello? Is everybody hearing me and seeing me? Okay, we've got one.
Yeah, they're there.
There. Okay, fine. Very good.
From now on, if the professor asks you to respond, a smiley face will suffice. The sooner you do it, the sooner he can continue the lecture.
Okay, thank you, Shimon. There have been various plans and schemes for expanding capital ownership to the masses of people. One of the most widespread in the United States, for example, is what is called employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs. Some 8 million workers in some 10,000 firms now are part owners of the companies that they work for. Some of these are quite large companies. These are not just small and medium-sized companies. These are quite large companies. I see I'm not moving again on the screen. Is everybody seeing me all right? Can I have smiley faces, please? Am I on again? Well, I'm seeing myself move on the screen, so I assume that it's okay. United Airlines is an ESOP company. Avis Rent-A-Car is an ESOP company. Some of these are very large companies. And this is a movement which has taken hold in the United States, which has spread to other parts of the world. There are similar plans in Spain, in Costa Rica, and in Ecuador, and other countries. One of the most successful was set up in Alaska by the Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971, where regional and village corporations were established, financed by the U.S. government, in lieu of returning the lands to the indigenous people which they were claiming and which had been taken from them, first by the Russians and then by the Americans. So these corporations were established. They invested in all kinds of productive enterprise, in fisheries, in forestry, in tourism, in oil and gas, in minerals. One of the regional Alaskan Native regional corporations owns the largest zinc mine in the world, for example. Another one owns part of Alaska Airlines. And the indigenous people of Alaska, which are about 150,000 people, divided between Eskimos, Indians, and Aleuts, are undoubtedly per capita the wealthiest in indigenous people anywhere in the world. In future, if economic, social, political chaos is going to be avoided, plans such as this are going to have to be developed and put into place so that more and more people can own more and more of the productive assets, the productive capital of the modern economy. And this is something that I've been very much involved with. This is something that I'm very much concerned about, and I'm delighted that one of the students asked a question which enabled me to go into this at some length. The other question or comment had to do with my comment in discussing manufacturing and the theory of the firm about the origins of the corporation. And the origins of the corporation, as I mentioned, go back to the development of the great trading companies, primarily Dutch, English, French, and Portuguese, eventually Spanish, that opened up the Western Hemisphere, the Far East, South Asia, and so on, Africa, to the European merchants and traders, and manufacturers, of course, in terms of their exports. One of the first and most, for many, many decades and centuries, the most important of these was the East India Company, which was chartered by Queen Elizabeth I in the year 1600, and which lasted until the 1870s, and was extremely large, extremely wealthy, extremely profitable, and extremely powerful. At one time, because the company opened up India and controlled much of India, it had an army of 200,000 in the Indian subcontinent, which was considerably larger than the British Army and at the time. The great advantage that these trading companies had was twofold. First of all, the limited liability of the shareholders. Not everybody was responsible for the entire company, and you were responsible only to the extent of the capital that you had invested. Secondly, the ability to put together the capital of a large number of well-to-do merchants so that they could finance risky ventures in ships that went all over the world, trading in all these parts of the world that I mentioned. And quite often these ships had serious problems. They often were lost at sea. Sometimes when they would go ashore to do their trading, and there would be a problem with the local people. Excuse me, just 1 minute. Chadwick, Riley, you have a comment?
Nothing crazy.
Well, apparently not. At least I'm not getting any feedback. Should I be getting feedback on this?
No, I'm not seeing anything here.
Yeah, okay. Because
I'm not seeing anything. Just continue.
okay.
You want me to head up? Everything okay?
Pardon me?
Everything okay?
I think so.
I'll put mine in the morning, yeah?
Okay. See you next week. Thank you very much, Emil. With reference to both of two of these subjects, the new economic revolution that's going on, and the history of the East India Company, I can suggest readings from The Economist magazine, and that leads me to be able to mention that in terms of economics, I have an easy time recommending reading matter. In terms of daily newspaper, the Financial Times of London, in terms of a weekly news magazine, The Economist. And both of them are owned by the same company. They are superb publications. If you're interested in economics and want to continue with your studies, in terms of contemporary events, I can do no better than to recommend them. In terms of the third industrial revolution, as they put it, I can suggest that you get a copy of the April 21st, 2012, April 21st, 2012 issue of The Economist. It has a whole section called A Third Industrial Revolution, which explains 3D manufacturing and advanced robotics and other modern techniques. In terms of the East India Company, there was an excellent article in The Economist on December 17th, 2011. And again, by going into their website, you can get these articles. The one on the East India Company is called The Company That Ruled the Waves, and the other one, as I mentioned, is A Third Industrial Revolution. Okay, getting back now to the theory of the firm, which is what we were talking about when the class period ended last week. As I mentioned, one form or another of corporation has, ever since the East India Company, been by far the most significant and the most important unit of production. Not only industrial production, not only the manufacturing of things, but also the provision of services, such as banking, architecture, law, accounting, etc., etc. I'm going to describe the theory of how a corporation is supposed to operate. And then I'm going to go into how corporations, by and large, in fact, do operate at the present time. And I'm talking about sizable companies, medium and large companies all over the world, almost all of which are in the form of a corporation. Theoretically, the shareholders of the corporation elect the board of directors. The board of directors, in turn, elects one of its number as the chairman of the board. One of the principal functions of the board of directors is the appointment of the high officers of the corporation: the president, executive vice president, senior vice presidents, etc., etc. The other significant function of the board of directors is to decide policy. And these people, the president, executive vice president, etc., that I just mentioned, are supposed to carry out policy. That is the theory of the firm, of the corporation. In actual practice, most large corporations do not operate this way at all. They don't operate this way for a lot of different reasons. First of all, they have, in many cases, hundreds of thousands or even millions of shareholders. Some of these shareholders have 50 shares. They have 100 shares. They have very tiny percentage of the company, and mostly they buy the shares in order to hope for an increase in the value or the share price of the shares. In other words, they're speculating rather than investing. They are not providing capital to the company, which the company then uses to expand. They are simply hoping for an increase in the share value, which will then they can sell it and make some money and so on. They're speculators. They're not investors.